You may not have realized it, but you just have left DevOps in the Kinepolis. It's going to be crucial to stay calm for what comes next, because you have been thrust into a new dimension known as the IT zone. Here you are in 50 after Unix, so in 2020 of our area, in a small country of Western Europe named France. You are now a project manager within its Ministry of Education. The French government has recently decided to modernize its education system. And your manager has tasked you with organizing a symposium focused on exploring the key trends in the education sector's evolution. Nevertheless, like any self-respecting organization, top-down is never far away, so you are strongly encouraged to enlist the services of external consulting companies. Before you even have a chance to voice your concerns, your boss explained that this directive comes from Jupiter God himself, slipping in the suggestion to add the McKinney company in the bidding process along the way. As you probably figured out, this is a Gallo-Roman anachronistic dystopia, and any resemblance to recent French political scandal may not be coincidental. So, McKinney, you already heard about them, but you don't really know what they do, so you decide to go on their website. This one. This is the real one in production. I will translate that in English for you here. As you can see, there's not a lot of information, but there's the Arc de Triomphe, which is a French symbol that says that we are a winner. But there's something really important here. In the IT zone, McKinney is written with a S we don't pronounce, because I don't want to be shot by them after the end of that talk. So the aim here is to know how they can help you in the reform of the education system of a world country. So let's scroll a bit. Here, this is their first value proposition. They state to be role of accelerator of innovation in more than 200 areas of expertise. So it means that this is a quite big consulting company. But right in the middle, they state to have more than 5,000 technological profiles. This is confusing. Why are they unfazing just one of their areas of expertise? Does it mean that they're more on the tech industry than the other thing? But never mind. After that, they try to create some empathy with you by introducing you to some of their team members. But don't get them wrong, you are here on the home page, so they are not anybody. You have here the managing director of McKinney, one member of the global executive committee, and the leader of the insurance business unit. You can also see that if you click on those people, there's a page dedicated on how great they are. But unfortunately, that doesn't really mean a thing to you, since it won't help you regarding your mission. So let's go back to the main page. Here you have a first call to action there that invites you to discover some other people. So let's see who are there. And here, once again, they are not anybody. Those are directors and senior directors of McKinney. You can also discover that they each lead one business unit, such as industrial strategies and operational transformation of industrial players. I don't even know what it means, but it sounds clever. The McKinney Cancer Center, so does they own a hospital or something? And digital division, because who doesn't have a digital division today? So let's see if there's someone specialized in education. No. OK, that doesn't sound well. OK, here, let's go back to the main page. After that, we have some of their publications. This is a good thing, because this is a demonstration of the know-how. So what do we have here? People, capital of the earth, at the heart of company sustainable performance. Is that even a sentence? I don't know. But here we have reindustrialization, industrial strategies, banking sector, triple transition in the distribution sector. Triple one, not a single one. OK, so nothing related to education, unfortunately. And then there is a section that take the full page that invites you to work for them. But you are not even the profile for that. So you start wondering if that website was made to attract potential new talent, or if it was made for potential customers. This is really confusing. And then the location of their office at Paris. So it's been a good 5 minutes you're on that website, and you still don't know how they can help you. But when you land into that page, you notice that at the very top of it, there is a menu here, great user experience, by the way, that invites you to learn what their job is. So let's see that. What is their job? And their job are 3D rotating balls. So that will only emphasize the fact that they are trying to position themselves on the tech industry, but this is not your concern at all. So you are about to give up. But there is a nice animation on arrow there that invites you to scroll a bit more. Perhaps eventually you will have the information you need. And what do you discover? They have a matrix organization. How helpful this is. But finally here, there is something about education. And you ended up with the information you needed, with what they know about education, testimony of their clients, publication, and because they really like that formula, it ends with the people that work on that business unit, but you will only find here the top of the consulting crop, with the partners and the senior partners. The poor little business analysts won't even get a mention there. So you ended up learning more about McKinney organizations and how they can actually help you. So you leave then with a frustrating sense of being unfulfilled. And this feeling doesn't come from nowhere. This is a clear sign that you just uncoated the IT zone. The IT zone is a world where belief and science blend together. It's a realm governed by unseen forces that determine what each person will produce. Because you might be tempted to point fingers at McKinney designers for such a bad user experience, but in reality, it exists a phenomenon beyond their control that partly drives them to design the website that way. To understand that, we need to go back at the date of the 13th of July in 1998. The New York Times featured a front-page story that altered the landscape of the IT zone, showcasing the remarkable achievement of the Dr. Jacob Nielsen. And despite what the picture might imply, he's not the one who invented the mouse, although he seems quite delighted to be holding one. So, Dr. Jacob Nielsen was widely regarded as the guru of the web page usability. He's one of the pioneers of the user experience. He set out on a mission to improve the usability of the web because he noticed, especially in the 90s, that companies creating their own website had a tendency of optimizing one search engine metric that you know as... Sorry? Yes, SEO. But that's not the SEO. This is something older than that. This is the CEO. You look surprised. This is the C-level ego optimization. Because, and that's not a joke, because in this article of 1997, Topc mistake of web management, mistake number 3 was letting the site structure mirror your org chart. He said that users should not have to care about how your company is organized, so they should not be able to deduce your organizational structure from the structure of your website. And a classic sign of mismanaged website is when the homepage has a button for each of the senior vice presidents in the company. Something you definitely didn't experience at all today in 2023. He's backed up his observation by another pioneer of the user experience, the Dr. Nigel Bevan. In April 1998, in the paper Usability Issues in Website Design, he was explaining why are so many websites frustratingly slow and difficult to use. And one reason is that organizations often produce websites with a content and a structure which mirror the internal concern of the organization rather than the needs of the user on the website. That's why here McKinney was pushing a lot about the fact that they try to position themselves in the tech industry and the fact that hiring, even though this is not your concern at all. So at the end of the 90s, we already knew that this is a bad pattern. So what is pushing the designers today to continue to do such things? As you dig deeper for answer, you find yourself transported to a new area of the IT zone. Jumping ahead to Redmond, in the Seattle region of the United States. In 38 after Unix, and you are now, so it's 2008, and you are now the marketing director at Microsoft, and you're working on strategy to boost the sales for the commercial hit of that time, Windows Vista. Why are you laughing? And then, suddenly your boss burst into your office in a rage because one competitor had just released an ad campaign on the small flaws of your new software flagship product.
Hello, I'm a Mac and I'm a PC. Here with good news for anyone who's ever been frustrated by this fixing bug. No, I'm making them easier to live with. My new line of calming teas. There's Crashy Time Chamomile, just the thing to soothe the nerves after a Vista-related crash. Or if Vista's making your applications run slow, there's pomegranate patience. The mornings are raspberry restart time. Also afternoons, but yes, let's move on to my line of Vista stress-relieving bath salts.
So this is a real ad they made at that time. So it's a complete disaster. Your competitor is mocking the flaws of your new operating system. And frustrated by the frequent crashes and the hardware compatibility problems, your customers are choosing to either go back to your previous operating system, Windows XP, or even worse, for the first time, they are switching to the beaten Apple competitor. And the pressure is so high that you have to let PC manufacturers to continue selling new machines under Windows XP instead of Vista. So I won't say it was a failure, it simply didn't work. So in the midst of this unfortunate situation, two researchers from Microsoft and one from the University of Maryland began to wonder if we can turn this setback into an opportunity for a study. So they kicked off an analysis across the 50 million lines of code of the more than 3,000 binaries of Vista. And this analysis wants to evaluate how well traditional indicators can predict software failures within these modules, because they know which modules had production bugs. So they're trying to figure out if there is a connection between a failing module and something like the fact that it had a low code coverage, for example. But before doing that, they added into a mix another indicator, which is the, sorry, I didn't explain what are those indicators. There's the code churn, code complexity, cyclomatic complexity, if you know it, dependencies, the coupling, code coverage, the test coverage, and the number of bugs detected before the release. But before doing this analysis, they added another indicator, which is the organizational structure, which is weird because this is not technical at all. So to be a good predictor of software failures, these indicators should have a precision as a recall as close as 100%. And here are the results. And surprisingly, the organization structure had the best score. So in this study of 2008, the researchers demonstrated that in the case of Vista, the state of the organization was a more reliable indicator of software failure than traditional measures such as the code coverage. So in other words, to echo Peter Drucker, organization eats code quality tools at breakfast. It's not sonar that will save you if you are performing some scaled agile framework such as SAFe. That was an easy shot, but perhaps you don't know SAFe, and you're really lucky. So the researcher's initial goal was, in fact, to confirm one statement that was made several years before, in 1975, in the book The Mythical Man-Month from Dr. Frederick Brooks, where it stated that product quality is strongly affected by organization structure. By the way, this book is not for the faint-hearted believers of the Gantt chart cult, as it might give them some case of heartburn. So you sense that slight tingle at the back of your neck. This is because you have been taking another leap. So it was just to make sure that you're still awake. But this is the sound of the train pulling you into London in 46 after Unix, so in 2016. And you make your way to the headquarters of the multinational online travel agency where you work as an architect. You have defined the architecture of the information system relating to train ticket reservation as follows. With the development teams, you determined that it was the best architecture to fit the business needs, which is to offer a standardized train reservation experience, regardless of the country, because indeed, your company is selling train tickets all over the world, and each country deals with the train in different ways. So since your company doesn't want to do custom development for each of those countries, this architecture is broken down into 3 agnostic components, which are rail supplies that aggregate the APIs of the railways companies, such as SNCB in Belgium, SFCF in France, and so on. On top of it, rail shopping is the business logic, how do you search for trains, select seat options, and so on. And finally, the user interface. So this architecture was defined 3 years ago. It's now time for you to come down your ivory tower as an architect to see what the developers have done. Because you heard that even though these systems are quite new, they are already really complicated to maintain in production. So you took a look at the code and, oh my God, it has been delivered exactly what the company was trying to avoid. Each subcomponent was divided by country using if statements. And the worst part is that some features had been duplicated in each country instead of being gathered as shared. Shared as planned. So what went wrong? Is it a matter of insufficient skill and maturity of the development teams? After some investigation, you find out it came from one management belief, which is known as the feature team. So the feature team is a concept intended to boost the autonomy of a team by allowing them to work across all the layers of the system to implement a feature. But usually that feature is an entire project, and when this is done, they will do something else. And here the management had 3 teams on 3 different time zones. So they specialized those teams by country, thinking it will be easier to manage since the rollout plan in production was to release first France, then the UK, and finally Germany. However, each team had its own management, its own specific deadlines, but they were all contributing to the same code base. Since those teams had little reason to collaborate and had different objectives, time zone, this belief with the pressure to deliver led to teams protecting themselves from the work of the other to secure their own deadline. And that's why we ended up with the if my country statements. And the worst part of that story is that since the ownership of each component is not clear at all, no one wants to bear with the cost of the technical debt. So it looks like the IT zone is trying to send you a message. It seems that the user experience and the product design, the product and code quality, and architecture are strongly impacted by your organization. So far, we just have seen some symptoms, but what can explain all those things? To find an explanation, we need to go back this time to April 1968. Dr. Melvin Conway published an article in Data Mission titled How Do Committees Invent?, where he's looking for the way organization design systems. And now we will do a little exercise that you will be able to reproduce on your own organization. So let's consider this e-commerce system. It's made up of 4 subcomponents that we also call subsystem. Here you have user management, shopping features, payment, and billing. A system can be anything from a website to a software product. It can be your smartphone or even a car. Melvin Conway wonders if there exists a relationship between the structure of the system and the structure of the organization in charge of its design. He noticed that whatever the context, for each of those systems, you will be able to find in the organization a team in charge of it. Okay. To make the system work, some of the subsystems need to interface with each other. An interface in computer science can be data transfer through an API. And when 2 subsystem interfaces, then the teams in charge of it have to communicate in order to negotiate a specification of that interface, a contract. And this cross-team communication can be facilitated sometimes by a coordinator that today might be a product owner or scrum master. When you have 2 systems that don't interface, like shopping and billing, then there is no requirement for those teams to collaborate or to communicate and negotiate any contract. So Melvin Conway demonstrated then that there is a close relationship between the structure of the system and the structure of the organization that produces it. It's not uncommon for a team to be responsible for several subsystems. In that case, the structure of the organization becomes a collapsed version of the structure of the system. Sometimes this is the opposite, because you can have several teams on one system. So this structural similarity between the system and the organization is known as an homomorphism. And there is the twist. Because you may think that, okay, Melvin Conway didn't exactly invent something groundbreaking by saying that, but in fact, there is some properties behind this homomorphism that can be a real pain in some cases. To explain you that, let's be back at the really beginning of a project. You have the business need to analyze. The structure of the system is not yet defined, but management has already chosen this organization. You know that to address a business need, you have several possible design solutions, each with their own drawbacks and advantages. The role of an organization is to determine what should be the best solution by comparing all the solutions they can imagine, right? So to simplify the problem, let's narrow down all the possible solutions to just these 2 here. And let's say that the second one is the best one, is the better option. What do we see here? There is an interface between billing and user system, and there is also a checkout subsystem that takes on some responsibilities that are spread across shopping and payment here in the first option. And as well, here there is no interface between user and billing. So the $1 million question is, can that predetermined organization discover and choose the second option, which is the better one? What do we see? Regarding the organization, there's no formal communication between user and billing, and there is no checkout team. If we apply the homomorphism rule, they should rather choose the first option. But why? Because user and billing team may not realize that by collaborating with each other, they will discover better design by adding an interface. As well as shopping and payment teams, they will struggle to envision the emergence of a checkout subsystem that sits across their scope, because this is the management who has predetermined the scope. And that will have a strong impact on the way they will think about the problem. And you know that usually the communication structure inside an organization is not flexible enough. So this organization is constrained in its ability to evolve and will be limited to produce systems that looks like their own design. And moreover, the larger the organization, the more pronounced this tendency is. So it means that the very act of choosing an organization means that we have made design choices, explicitly or not. And the act of choosing an organization will narrow down the range of possible solutions, potentially excluding option that could be better solution. To give an example of that, Melvin Conway talks about one organization in the 60s that had 8 people, and they were in charge of building a COBOL compiler and an ALGOL one. Because they had timing issues, they split into 2 groups, assigning 5 people on the COBOL compiler and 3 on the ALGOL one. As a result, the COBOL compiler ran in 5 phases, while the ALGOL compiler in 3 only. Although the challenges were nearly identical. But not everyone agreed with that observation, because in 1996, a new perspective came from Topc. He said that if you were to task 5 people to build a COBOL compiler, this compiler will run in 4 phases into 5, just because someone has to be the manager. But Melvin Conway describes something even more concerning about this homomorphism. So at the really beginning of a project, when you analyze the problem, usually you don't put a lot of people to avoid overcrowding. But usually a management is not too far from this matter. And he knows that they will be blamed if they miss the deadline without employing all the people they are at their disposal. And this will create a kind of pressure on the initial designers of the system that would prefer to continue tackling the complexity of the problem until they can reduce it to find a solution, rather than fragmenting the knowledge and the understanding by delegating some part to others. But since managers think it is too risky to proceed this way, they will have no choice but to delegate to reinforcement that will be themselves reinforced to secure the deadline as much as possible. According to Conway, this is rooted to the mistaken belief that the work of 2 people on 4 months is equivalent of the work of 4 people on 2 months. And to make fun of that, Federer says that the bearing of a child takes 9 months, no matter how many women are assigned to the task. So let's go back to our organization that has grown a lot. As you know, in companies, you have management rules, such as double pizza team, each team led by a manager, and this will shape an organization establishing a hierarchy based on delegation. Because yes, the initial designers, they have the knowledge already, so they will take the lead. So it means that an organization will be shaped before having the structure of the system. And once the organization exists, it gets used. Moreover, since you have to keep busy those lazy developers, you will have to split the problem amongst all the people. And it means that this kind of intersection of responsibility will go unnoticed. Because by delegating to subgroups, in fact, you have predetermined scope that will act as blinders for these people. And you have created what we call a silo. So that's why Conway said there is no such thing as a design group which is both organized and unbiased. But he also had something that made me a bit weird, because he said that when delegation takes place, the quality of the communication within the organization disintegrates. What does it mean? In fact, the initial designers here, they have to step back from the problem analysis, to manage knowledge transfer and synchronization. However, these setbacks weaken their overall understanding of the problem. So now, when you have two people from hierarchically distant teams that need to agree about an interface, for example, the decision-making process becomes more complex. Because if they disagree, they will have to involve higher-level people who have less knowledge about the problem. And if those people disagree, you have to go up the delegation chain, involving someone even further from the problem analysis. And most of the time, these people is not technical at all. They should take a decision. So that's why the structure of the communication will resemble to the hierarchical structure of the company. And this will, by homomorphism, be reflected in the systems they produce. According to Conway, this is why the military tends to create systems that look like the org chart. You just have to take a look about how a COBOL program is organized. This is just like a regiment with division and section, and that's a real story. So the structure of large systems tend to disintegrate during development, qualitatively more so than with small systems because of the homomorphism. Frederick Brooks illustrates well this disintegration of the communication. He says that when we had 3 people in the team, we had 3 communication channels. But here we moved to 11 people. But we didn't move to 11 channels as well. We moved to 55 communication channels. So it means that the communication effort is not something linear at all. So it means that the work effort doesn't either. And we have seen that a system designed by 3 people will not be shaped the same way than a system designed by 11. Conway adds that, by experience, 3 well-picked team members will define a better solution than a team of 11, just because any assumption of parallelism that might be true when you are peeling potatoes goes up in smoke when you design systems. And this idea of adding more and more people to secure the deadline and speed up the process will lead the organization toward its bureaucratic structure with unnecessary process and overhead of communication. That's why Conway end by saying it becomes necessary to restrict communication in order that people can get some work done. Who here ever complained about having too many meetings and ceremonies? Almost everyone. Is that a coincidence? Don't think so. So now you know that about the homomorphism and so on. What can we say about organization at scale pattern on off-the-shelf that are agnostic from what you have to build, like SAFe? If you don't know it, you are very lucky, but this is a full graph of hierarchy, matrixal hierarchy, and communication. So I'm quite sure that if you apply the homomorphism like that, they should create something that we call the distributed monolith, but don't tell them because they will be mad. So for now, we didn't state the law yet, but the Conway law says that organizations with design systems are constrained to produce design which are copies of the communication structure of this organization. That's why when you were on the McKinney website, the first thing you discovered was the org chart starting from the top. And as you delve into the website, further you went down the layers of the org chart. The second thing you discovered was their matrix organization, even before knowing how they can help you. So this is a good example in production where the structure of the communication aligned with their administrative structure and ended up in the systems they built, their website. In the case of here, the online travel agency, even though an architecture was thought to be agnostic from the national trains, the teams ended up by building a country-separated system because they were themselves organized by country. In the case of Vista, you have seen that the quality of the organization had a strong impact on the quality of the system. And this is one of the effects of the homomorphism. Quality on the side has an effect on the other side. I didn't explain what they put inside organizational structure, but there were 8 statements. I only listed 3 of them. They were checking that a large loss of team members affect knowledge retention, therefore quality. The more contributors to a component belong to the same team, the higher the quality. The closer the person with decision-making power over a component is to the engineers who build it, the better the quality. Oddly enough, these criteria are diametrically opposed to the Conway principle of disintegration. And that's not coincidence at all. So now you may wonder, are we doomed to suffer the effect of the Conway's law? In fact, you won't be able to avoid it, but you can learn to better manage its effect. Conway explains that the effort of design must be organized according to the need for communication. So when we have a problem, we need to reduce it to have smaller problem until we find subsystem. When you have that, you need to think about how they have to interface to make the system work. And since you have that, you will be able to define an organization according to the need for communication in a way that the structure of the communication will be strictly limited to what is necessary. And it will mark out areas of team autonomy without over effort of synchronizing and communication. But we also know that the first design is never the best one, and that the business needs evolves with time. So it means that this is really important for that organization to be flexible enough to be effective, to continue to design effectively. So without detailing all the steps here, Melvin Conway just described a new method of organization and design that will name later in 2010 as the inverse Conway maneuver. So this is a term which is coined by Johnny Leroy and Matt Simmons in an article named Dealing with Tricky Legacy Platform. They say that the idea is to break down the silos that limit the team in its ability to collaborate by reorganizing. But that might not be realistic in all the cases. And remember that this is a structure of the communication that will be reflecting in the system, not directly the hierarchy. So it will be easier to manage the communication path without dealing with the sensitive topic of an administrative reorganization. However, in 2015, the IT zone see the rise of the microservices, and James Lewis, technical director at Southworks, had that funny idea that an organization should focus on a structure that corresponds to the systems they want to build, instead of asking existing teams to follow an architecture on paper. And without claiming to be from the school of the inverse Conway maneuver, several other observers from the IT zone share the same observations. So in 2017, Jan Bosch, which is a professor at the Chalmers University of Technology and the former vice president for the Nokia Research Center, unfortunately, described the BAPO model. He said that we need to focus first on how we want to create values for our users and how we want to generate revenues. This is the B here that stands for business. When you have that, you can think about the architecture, all the technical choices that meet this business need. When you have the architecture, you can think about the processes, and the working methods, and the tools that will make that architecture happen. And once you have the B, the A, and the P, you will know what are the skills you need to realize all those things and think about the organization. But what notes also Jan Bosch is that usually organizations are not BAPO at all. Instead, they are OPAB. So the organization serves as a basis to create processes out of sheer convenience, because you have Michael here, he's a validator, so you will end up with a validation process, but you don't know what's the value of that. And all the things will lead to an accidental architecture. And this architecture, this restrictive architecture, guided from the past of the company rather than its future, will narrow down what we can do regarding the business and what we can do regarding innovation. But what is a bit surprising here is that if you go back to Nigel Bevan, in his paper he was listing 5 steps to 5 tips that prevent us from falling into the problem we have seen at the beginning of the talk. And surprisingly, those steps align perfectly with the BAPO model. But these recommendations are just made for our website. So you might be curious about what we can do to perform an inverse Conway maneuver when designing systems, designing software and architecturing a system, for example. But don't worry, we have a lot of things. In 2020, in 2003, a new revelation came inside the IT zone, which is the publication of the domain-driven design book. Who ever heard about domain-driven design? So Eric Evans, who published that book, wanted to bring back the business in the heart of the software development. And domain-driven design emphasizes the fact that we should always start from the analysis of the problem before going through the architecture and implementation. That's why it's separate two spaces. The problem space that represents the business and the solution space that represents the architecture. Because as engineers, we all have this natural bias of already constructing a solution in our minds before we have finished understanding the problem. And how do we proceed? So the first thing is to analyze the business needs. So you have to do that with the domain experts. So, and to collaborate with them, you don't need a predefined tech organization. You just need cross-functional people. So you put everyone in a room, and the aim here is to list all the business concepts, their characteristics, and their behaviors to map out the business need. Technically, this is done through an event storming, which is a workshop invited by Alberto Brandolini. So the aim here is to list all the domain events that are important for the problem we are trying to solve. And then we will organize it according to a timeline that will bring out the flow of business value creation. This will mechanically list all the business concepts, such as here, catalog, item, cart, and price. Then we will analyze the life cycle of those concepts. It will give us some kind of limits. And those limits is, in fact, our subsystems. So in domain-driven design, we call that the bounded context. And this is the starting point to create your architecture and to start the analysis of the solution space. So to define the architecture, we do a context map, which is the only tool I know that deals with the effect of the Conway's law. So the first thing you have to define is the need for interfacing. So for example, here, the payment system interfaces with the shopping system through an openness service. You can translate that as an API. This is exactly the same thing. Once you have done that, you will think about the relationship regarding the business of those systems, the power balance between those systems. For example, if we say that they are mutually dependent, it means that if one of the systems fails, the other will fail as well. Why? Because if you had something in your cart, but you cannot pay, that's a failure for your user. If you can pay, but you can't put something in your cart, this is a failure as well. And why are we doing that? Because after that, we will analyze the relationship between the teams in charge of the system. If they are inside a customer-supplier relationship, it means that the payment team need to negotiate to prioritize their need in the backlog of shopping, and shopping can say, "No, we'll do that later." But it's not sure that this is a good idea, since if payment fail, they will fail as well. They should rather enter another relationship, which is a partnership. So we won't see all the things about the context map, but this is a really great tool that will help you to identify the effects of the Conway's law. So domain-driven design will help you to deal with the B, the A, but unfortunately, it won't give you a lot of guidance regarding how to organize. Because it won't tell you if you need several teams on one system, or you can have several systems for one team. And also, it will overlook some technical teams, such as the ops, for example. But luckily for us, in 2019, is issued team topologies from Matthew Skelton and Manuel Pais. Who ever heard about team topologies? Okay, some of you. So it will deal with the P and the O. So this is a dynamic organization pattern that is in the line of the inverse Conway maneuver, and which is complementary to the domain-driven design. So to explain you, usually when you create a team, you add more and more people until it fits the complexity of the system they have to build and maintain. Here, team topologies say that this is a bad idea. Instead of that, we should limit the size of the system to the connective load that team can handle. That way, they won't be drawn into too many responsibilities, and they will be able to maintain the software and so on. And each service must have and must totally belong to one team with enough bandwidth to be able to build, maintain, deliver in production, and operate the service. Okay, there are some other processes here, but let's move to the organization part. This one is really interesting. I will just give you one example because we won't have the time to dig into all the things about team topology. But let's take our example here when we have shopping and payment teams. And let's say that, okay, they realize that there is some kind of heaviness around their interface here with some work duplicated around. So team topologies theorize three ways of interaction between teams. The first one is the collaboration. Sounds odd, but that's the name they give to that. It means that here the teams will closely work together because they need to find a solution on a problem they are not used to deal with. So it will increase their cognitive load because they still have to deal with their own system, right, and their day-to-day job. And the aim here is to make sure that this collaboration period is as small as possible, because otherwise they will just burn out. And let's say that they determine that this will be the better option. Okay, we have a checkout subsystem here. If this subsystem represents too many cognitive load for both teams, it means that we need to pop out a new team, perhaps by pulling some people from those teams and hiring, but that's the spirit of team topology. And since now we have the need for interfacing between the system, with, for example, here between shopping and checkout, we will enter a new interaction mode, which is the X as a service. So it means that a shopping team needs to define an interface for checkout in a way that they will be autonomous in its integration. So it means that it should be documented, self-destructive, and so on and so on. But it also means that checkout needs to provide a human service to, shopping has to provide a human service to checkout so they can take their need for evolution and so on. But in a way that every communication path between checkout and shopping has been reduced as what is strictly necessary, so they can be autonomous. So we won't go to every interaction of team topologies. The one I didn't talk about was the facilitation. And all the form of teams we have, like the enabling team, the platform team, and the complicated subsystem. But you have to know that these things are used by Docker today, according to teamtopologies.com. If you need to learn more about that, you can go on their website. This is a really great way to see. It is a new way to organize teams, and this is really interesting. So now, with your new tool, you will be able to perform an inverse Conway maneuver through the BEPO model with domain-driven design and team topologies. If you have any doubt, you have to know that Accelerate. Who heard about Accelerate already? Some of you? Yeah. And Accelerate tend to support the efficiency of the inverse Conway maneuver. But before you leave, you have to know that this is not a magic wand. Because reorganizing an existing system will not guarantee you to obtain the desired evolution. As Matthias Veras says in his article, if the system is rigid to modification, changing the organization will have a limited impact. So in another way, changing the organization won't fix a bad design if the system is rigid. So it means that you have to push effort into cleaning up the system and the design before going through a reorganization. And furthermore, first, maybe you won't have, let's say, the power to reorganize. But if you do, keep in mind that this is really costly from a human perspective. So don't change the organization every 2 weeks, every 3 months. That doesn't make sense. You have to see the Conway's law has a constraint on what we will build. And the inverse Conway maneuver is one of the tools at our disposal to handle the effect of the Conway's law. But this is not a silver bullet. If you cannot change the organization, start by changing the communication path. If it's not working, it means that you will have to do some trade-off regarding the architecture. Because sometimes, as an architect, you say, oh, it should be like that, separate, and so on. and what has done the developers doesn't fit, and oh, this is the fault of the developers. In fact, this is not individuals that create software. This is organization who create software. So my name is Julien Topc. I'm a technical coach at Shodo, a French consulting company specialized in domain-driven design and software craftsmanship. And in my greatness kindness, I brought you back to the Kinepolis, but stay alert and pay attention to your belief. Otherwise, you risk to find yourself forever stuck in the IT zone. Thank you very much. So, since this is the lunchtime, you can come and see me after the talk if you have any questions. Thank you very much.